The ZOIA pedal can serve as a complete pedal board or as a single complex effect. Its blank slate quality makes it an incredibly powerful tool in your sonic arsenal, but it can also make it a little bit difficult to know where to start. My name is Evan Surchuk. In this video, I'll be breaking down the core logic of the ZOIA pedal into bite-sized pieces so that you can dive right in and start designing your own audio effects. If you'd like to jump to a particular part of this video, you can use the timestamps on the side of the screen and also in the video description. Let's touch base on setting up your ZOIA workspace and getting all plugged in. I highly recommend setting up the ZOIA on a desk where you can easily see the LCD screen and touch all the buttons. That way you don't have to squint or reach down to your pedal board and try and get everything figured out. It's really a lot easier if it's on a desk because then you can play your guitar, signal right in, and make changes in real time. Okay, so let's talk about the ZOIA's inputs and outputs. You can see they're all located here on the back of the pedal, so I'll just turn it around really quick. The easiest way to connect to the ZOIA is to plug your guitar into the left input here, and then plug your amp into the left output. In my case, I'm using the left and the right output to showcase some of the stereo effects that the ZOIA has, but that's totally not necessary. Once you are all plugged in, then you can just connect with a normal 9-volt barrel power adapter. It just has to be center negative. So yeah, once you're all plugged in, the pedal will boot, and it will look like this. To check your signal flow and make sure everything is plugged in correctly, hit this bypass button here on the bottom right until the buttons here turn red. That means that the pedal is bypassed. We can just run a little signal through and make sure that everything is all good to go. Once you confirm that you have signal going through the ZOIA, hit the bypass button one more time until the buttons here turn green. That means that the pedal is off bypass and will go through the modules that you set up. You may want to leave your amp on the clean channel as you program the ZOIA. This way you can hear all of your programming clearly and explore the ZOIA to its full potential. The core logic of the ZOIA can be broken down into two parts: placing individual modules and connecting them together. First, let's load an empty patch by turning the silver knob until we reach an empty slot. Once you've reached an empty slot, just press down on the silver knob and it will load that preset slot. Now that we have an empty slot, let's start placing modules. Tap any of the squares on the front of the ZOIA to propose a new module. As you can see, this placement is still tentative at this point. By tapping the back button, you can cancel the module placement. So let's begin by placing a module up here in the top left-hand corner. And at this point, we want to take signal in from your guitar. So we're going to scroll up to the top to where it says Interface Modules. I'm going to tap down on the knob. Then we're going to go to Audio Input. Here you can see different options for this module. So I'm going to scroll down to Color, tap in, and then I'm going to switch it to white. There we go. And then go back up to Done and tap in one more time. At this point, the module's been placed. And if you play some signal on your guitar and your pedal is in this green mode, the non-bypass mode, you should see the audio input module up here light up. And then if you want to check the signal further, you can just tap one of the squares and you can see there's some input signal. There we go. So that means that signal is getting into the ZOIA. One thing to note here is while we're playing signal, you'll see that both of these, hit the back button, both the right and the left button are both lighting up. And that's because when you're plugged into the left input and you have nothing plugged into the right input, it copies the signal to both sides. And this is just in case, you know, in the future for this preset, if you plug in a keyboard or something else, it'll automatically have the left and the right channel. So that can be something that's a little bit counterintuitive at first, but it makes programming easier later on and makes your patches more compatible with other instruments. So now that we have the input sorted, let's set up the output. It's pretty much the same process. We're going to tap down here to propose a module. We'll go to interface modules, and then instead of audio input, we'll go to audio output. And once again, we'll set the color. Just rotate when you have this setting selected. I like to do white for my inputs and outputs just to keep things organized, but you can choose whatever color scheme you want. And then I'll hit done to confirm the placement. Okay, so now we have our audio input and our audio output. What we want to do here is put an effect in the middle between these two. And so let's start with a hall reverb. This process is the same for placing the module. I think we'll place it here in the middle. Now let's place it here at the top row. And then we're going to scroll down this time to effect modules. And from there, we're going to choose hall reverb. And yeah, we can keep it blue. Hit done. Okay, so real quick, let's go over the anatomy of one of these modules in the ZOIA. The first and last squares in a module are usually its inputs and outputs. So if we tap this one, you'll notice that's, left input, right input, and then the last two are left output and right output. And so if you have one of these modules selected and you want to stop selecting it, once again, you can just hit the back button right here. It's the same thing as when you're placing a module before you hit done. You can hit back and it will, you know, prevent you from, it'll undo that placement, that tentative placement. So your back button over here is going to be your best friend. So from here, you'll notice that the first one is the input, the last one is the output, and then these in the middle are the different settings for that particular module. So you can think of that as if this module was an individual guitar pedal, these would be the knobs that you can turn for that specific effect. So now that we have our inputs, our effect, and our outputs, it's time to make some connections. So right now I have the mix selected, so I'm going to hit back to get out of that selection. Okay. And then if I want to make a connection, I want to start with the input where the guitar signal is coming in, and I want to connect to the input of our reverb module. So to make a connection, all you have to do is press down one square and then press down the other square that you want to connect to. You'll see now it's showing that there's a connection between the audio input left and the hall input left. So then let's copy that for the right input. We're going to select the audio input right and then the right input for the reverb. Cool. And there we go. We're all set. So we'll hit back to get out of that connection, to get out of examining that connection. Okay, so now let's try playing a little bit of signal into this effect. There we go. So now you can see over here at the end, these two squares are lighting up because the signal is going from the inputs into the inputs of the reverb all the way through the effect and then outputting right here. So it makes sense now if we want to take the signal out of the reverb module to the outputs, this output module that we have down here at the bottom, we just need to make two more connections. So we'll go to the hall reverb output left, connect that to the left square of this audio output. There we go. And do the same thing here. Take the right output of the reverb and set it to the right output of the audio output module. So now we should have some reverb action going on. So let's say I want to change that reverb effect and make the decay time longer. Well, we know it's going to be one of these modules here in the middle. So you can usually just press around and figure out where the particular parameter is that you want to shift. So here we have the decay time. So we can just turn this decay time knob up, and you can do this in real time, like while you're playing. Cool. And one more thing that we might do to increase the effect of that is to change the mix. So that's how much clean signal is pushed through the output and how much of the reverb affected signal. So let's try turning that up. Now that we have a functioning patch all worked out, let's take a moment to name it and also save it. Doing this will require us to use the functions that are located at the top of the ZOIA. So these squares are available for modules, but if you want to access these function buttons, you just hold down the Shift key and then hit another one of them. So before we can rename, we want to hit back so we get out of this, this mix control. And we just see the 3, the preset slot number. Then from there, we'll hold down Shift and then also hit this rename function button at the top. And from there, we can type in, let's try Verb. So we can hit Shift for a capital letter, and then V, E, R, B. Okay, then from there, you just tap in the knob to confirm that. Cool. And then you also need to hit the save button. So we'll hit Shift and then save. And there we go. So now if we scroll our knob here, you'll notice that preset 3 is named Verb. And we can tap that and it will return to the most recently saved version of that patch. If you'd like to make a copy of this preset before moving on, you can do so by making sure that you don't have any of these squares selected. You can do that by hitting the back button. And then you're going to turn the knob here to get to the patch list. And once you're over the patch you want, you just hit Shift and then copy. And then you can decide where you want to place that copy of the preset. And then it wants you to hit Save to confirm. So you're going to hit Shift and then Save. There we go. So now we have a duplicate of that patch right there. And if you're ever working on a version of a patch and you want to save your current progress to a new slot, you can do the same thing. Just select the patch that you're working on and then hit Shift and copy and select a new slot. And what it'll do is it'll make a copy with only the changes that you've made since the last save. So it's sort of like a save as function. All right, so now let's experiment with adding another module to our effect. This time we'll be adding a vibrato module that goes after the reverb. So to do so, we can press any of the squares here to start placing a module. Then we're going to go to Effect Modules. You can see I already have vibrato selected, but you can just scroll through and find the one that you want. Tap down on the knob. And then we'll change the color to magenta just to keep things organized. Different color than the inputs and the outputs. And then we'll change the channels option to 2 in, 2 out. And we'll do that because the reverb is already putting out a left and a right channel. So we might as well keep that, that signal flow stereo. If you're just plugged in with your guitar, it will just go to both channels because the audio input module clones it to both if you have just one plugged in. And this way, if you ever want to plug in a different instrument or pass this to a different musician, there's still a stereo flow going through the whole pedal. So anyway, so we're going to click in on the channels option, just switch it to 2 in, 2 out. Press it in one more time to confirm that change, and then press done. So now our module has been placed. Once again, it has the same anatomy as our other modules. The 2 leftmost squares are the input, the audio input, and the 2 rightmost squares are the audio output. So now we want the signal to go from the audio input module to the reverb, and then to the vibrato, and then out. So right now we have the signal going from the reverb directly out. So we need to break this connection. So to break a connection, first you can find the connection just by tapping any of the squares that have a connection, and you can see where else, what other squares are being lit up. So right now if I hit the left output of the reverb, you can see the left output audio square, the left square of the audio output module is also lit up. So if we want to break that connection, we just tap one and then the other, doesn't matter the order, and we'll hit Shift, and then we hit this trash can button here at the top. So now if I press this one, you'll see that the audio output, the square of the audio output module doesn't light up, and that's because there's no connection there anymore. So we'll do the same here, press one and then the other, and then we'll hit Shift and trash can. So now that connection has been broken, and we want to connect the reverb straight into our new vibrato module. So we'll press here, and this is the left output. So we should be able to just connect it right here. Yep, there we go. It's connected to the left input. Cool. And we'll do the same thing with the right. So it's the right output of the reverb into the right input of the vibrato. And then we need to connect the output of the vibrato right into the output squares of the audio output module. So we'll just tap the left output of the vibrato, press and hold, and then connect that to the audio output. So right output, press and hold, tap there. So now we should have signal going from audio input to reverb to vibrato to out. And yeah, so before we play some signal, the vibrato default settings are pretty strong. So we're going to turn that down to maybe 0.2 3. That's the depth, so how high and low that vibrato is going to shift the pitch of your guitar signal. And then this is the speed, so we'll turn that speed down a little bit as well. I mean, you can just tune this to taste as you play. So let's try playing some signal, and we'll test our signal flow, and also tune this a little bit until we get it to a sound that we like. So that's maybe a little bit too strong. So we'll go to the width of the vibrato and turn that down a little bit. Let's turn that. That's pretty cool. Maybe turn down the rate a little bit. You don't have to do the settings I'm doing. You can do it however you'd like. Maybe turn up the rate just a tad. Let's try playing another melody through it. Sounds pretty cool. One thing that we might do to improve this patch would be to add a little bit of the clean signal back into our output. So some of the signal that's not being put through the reverb or the vibrato, that will help kind of ground our patch and make it a little bit more playable. So we can do that. We could just make a connection right here straight from the audio input to the audio output. But in this case, we might want to have some control over the strength of that signal. And the easiest way to do that is to do it with a VCA. And that way we can change it later on quickly. So VCA stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier, and you can essentially just think of it as a volume knob. So if we want to place a module, we can just tap here, and we can go to our audio modules. And from there, I already have it selected, but you can just go to VCA. And we'll set the color to white. It doesn't, it's up to you what color you want, but I generally try and keep modules white that have clean signal, that aren't being affected by anything. It just keeps it clear in my head. Then we'll scroll and change the channels from 1 in, 1 out to stereo. And then we'll go back up and tap done. Cool, so now we have our VCA module. And you'll see, let's go over the anatomy of it. So we have our 2 inputs on the left side, as usual, and our 2 outputs on the right side. And then in the center, we just have a volume control. So we'll set this volume control right off the bat. We'll set it to maybe -2.6 or something like that. So we are getting some signal. Because if it's turned all the way down on the left side, then no signal at all is going to get through. Set that back up to the single digits somewhere. That's probably fine. And then we're going to connect our audio inputs here straight to our audio inputs, the external inputs. So we'll just connect the right input to there, and then connect this input into there. So you can see now there's the connections between both of them. And then we want to connect our output straight to the audio output module. There we go. So I just connected these two. So now we have a signal that flows from the input module into the VCA. And then, so that's 2 channels, and then 2 channels going here from the VCA output into the external output module. You'll also notice here as I press this, just to observe how the ZOIA works, the input module, you can see also these 2 are lighting up, our VCA, but also the reverb input modules are lighting up. So just pressing around allows you to figure out, where the signal flow is. So let's try playing some signal through and see. Oh, one other thing we might want to do is the reverb module has a mix control. And what that does is it mixes some of the clean signal. So when signal goes into the reverb module, it'll mix in, a tiny bit of the clean signal. I mean, depending on how you have this set. So if you set it to 50, it'll be half, your raw guitar signal and half the reverb. In this case, we're already we've made this kind of extra channel that's just going to be handling the clean input. So we're actually going to turn this mix all the way up to 100 so that it's only sending the affected reverb signal to the vibrato. So let's play some signal through and see how this sounds. So that already sounds a little bit more clear and a little bit more playable. So what we can actually do is turn up the width of our vibrato a little bit. Make this effect a tiny bit more extreme, because we know we have some clean signal that kind of brings it back to earth. So that's maybe a little bit too extreme. We can dial it into somewhere around 450 or so. All right, so before we move on, let's once again save this module. We can do that by hitting the Shift button and hitting Save. Now, if you do that, it'll just save over your last version of this in this slot. So we're okay with doing that. So we just hit Save. There we go. It'll save the preset. Now that we've saved our presets, let's explore some of these function buttons here at the top because they're incredibly useful. So if you want to affect a particular module on your patch, just press one of the squares. And then if you want to move that module, you're going to hit Shift and then the Move button. And then you'll see it's in Move Module mode. And you can press any of the squares, and then it'll move that whole module somewhere else. So you can move it up to here. Or if you want to move it to the end, if it doesn't have enough space, it'll just wrap the module around to the next line. So let's move that module back up to the top. The next function is the copy function. So if we want to duplicate a module that's already on here, we can just, once again, select it by pressing any of the squares, hit Shift down at the bottom, and then copy. It'll ask you where to put it. So put it right down beneath the first one. So here you'll see there's a couple of different settings. We can change the color, change it to red. And then we can hit the connections option, and we can decide whether or not we want to maintain the connections that the last module had, the original module had. So there's three options. There's none, which will just place a module with no connections. There's all, which will maintain the input and the output. And then there's just inputs or just outputs. So that can be useful depending on what you want to do with that copied version of the module. But once you've selected it, and you can see I can still move it around at this point. Once you've decided the color and the connections, you just hit done. And there we go. We have a duplicate of the last module. That kind of brings us around to the trash can here. So if we want to delete this module, we're just going to hit Shift and then delete. And there we go. That gets rid of that last module. There's a couple other functions on here. If you're curious about how they work, consult the manual. I'll just go over the names of them. So this one will rename things. It's usually just used for renaming the preset itself. So if you hit Shift, if we have no modules connected and we hit Shift and then rename, it'll ask us to name the preset. So I'm just going to hit back. So we're going to keep that name. There's the starred list. This allows you to kind of quickly get to highlights. Oh, here I wasn't pressing Shift. The starred list, it kind of lets you bookmark particular knobs that you want to shift in the future. So yeah, look that up in the module. It's very useful. There's also this view button. So this will allow you to see different information about a particular module. So if we hit Shift here, hit the back button, press that again, hit Shift and the view button, you can see it shows a connection list. So I can see that that input, the left audio input, is connected to our Hall reverb in and also our VCA. It can be useful to kind of troubleshoot and figure out where some signal is going and where it's coming from. And I think if we hit that and hit view again, yeah, so then it goes back to showing the audio levels. So we hit Shift, it shifts between the connection list and the audio level. The next one, of course, is the save button. And you can use that to save your preset. And then this is the randomize function. Yeah, look up more information about it in the manual. And then also down here, there is your master settings. So if you hit Shift, hit that, you can see that's the firmware version that we have in this video. Probably be advanced by the time it's released. There's a bunch of different options in here. Yeah, look up more of that in the manual. Very useful options. I can either save and exit, or I could just hit back to exit the config. After mucking around with all those function keys, I've pretty much returned this pedal to the state it was before I saved. But let's say I made some changes and I wanted to revert to the last version. So let's just play some module real quick just for demonstration purposes. Let's say we wanted to return to the version where we didn't add that VCA. All we have to do is hit the back button to deselect, make sure we have nothing selected, and you can tell because it's just showing the preset name. And then we're just going to rotate this silver knob till we get to the patch list. And we're just going to reselect patch number 4, and you'll see it'll reload to the last time we saved. There we go. So now you can see the VCA module is no longer there. In this section, we're going to explore the ZOIA's control modules. Control modules are used to automatically change the parameter values of any other module. You can think of control modules as a hand that automatically twists the knob of a guitar pedal. We'll start with the most common type of control module, an LFO. LFO stands for low frequency oscillator. It basically means a slow change over time in kind of a cyclical way. So we'll tap anywhere to place the module, and then we'll scroll here to control modules, and we'll go to LFO. And here we're going to switch the LFO to the waveform to a sine wave instead of a square, because a square module will just make a change quickly and then turn off. It's like kind of a quick on and off switch, whereas a sine wave kind of makes a change gradually over time. So then we'll scroll back up to the top and hit done. You can see here the light indicates how it will modulate whatever setting it's connected up to. So this is a little fast. So right off the bat, we're going to turn this down a little bit. And you'll see when you're adjusting settings in the ZOIA, often there are different scales that you can use to better understand different parameters. So in this case, I'm just going to tap the knob one time. You can see it switches into milliseconds. So that shows how quickly it goes from on to off. It takes about a second. So let's turn that down a little bit, make it slower. And you can see now this little module down here is moving quite a bit slower. We can slow this down quite a bit. So it takes a really long time for it to turn on and then back off again. So let's just try it at that setting about. All right, so now we want to connect this control module. You can see it shows it modulating. We're going to connect this to the vibrato rate of our vibrato module. So we can do that by tapping and holding one square and then the parameter square. Make that connection. Okay, cool. So it's showing that that's at 100%. So if we hit back, now if we tap this vibrato rate module, you'll see that it's modulating that as far as it possibly can. It's actually hitting the end. So this modulation by the control module is a little bit too strong. So we can actually change how much this LFO is adjusting the vibrato rate. We can do that by adjusting the connection strength. So we do that by tapping one module and then the other one that it's connected to. And then from there, we're going to lower this percentage to maybe, how about something like 20, around 20%. So now if we hit back, and then we hit this vibrato module, you'll see that it's just kind of adjusting it just a little bit there, providing some variation in the vibrato rate. We might even just lower this vibrato down a little bit. And you'll see the circle represents the base rate that's being set, and the line represents the active modulation. So now let's experiment with playing some sound through and see how this affects our signal. So it's kind of adding a bit of a chorusing effect, and it's a little bit less clear cut than when the vibrato was just at the same modulating at the same rate by itself. This kind of adds some nice variation to that. One thing I might also do to make this effect a little bit stronger is lower this VCA that we have here at the top that's taking clean signal right from your guitar and then putting it right to the outputs. So if we lower a little bit of this clean signal, lower the volume of that, then the effect will be a little bit stronger sounding. So let's try maybe there. Let's just see how that sounds. At this point, we have this preset pretty well dialed in, but let's experiment with adding a different type of module called an analysis module. This type of module can listen to any signal you feed to it and then kind of twist a knob based on that signal. So the type of module we're going to be using is called an envelope follower. So we'll put it down here in the lower left-hand corner, so there's plenty of room. So we'll tap here to place a module. Then we'll go to Analysis Modules and go to Envelope Follower. And then we'll switch this rise and fall time option to on. That lets you control kind of the speed at which it reacts to your guitar signal. We're going to hit done. So now that's right down here. And so if we want this to be able to listen to the guitar signal straight from your playing, we need to connect it right to the input module right here. Okay, so now that connection has been made. And then what do we want to control? We want to control the decay time of the reverb. So we'll do that by pressing this envelope follower output, and then we'll connect it to the decay time of the reverb. So let's hit back. So if we look here, that connection is connected to right there. Cool. So at this point, by default, this module is going to turn up the decay time when it hears signal. So let's see how that works. When it's getting signal, loud signal, it's pushing that line to the right and increasing the decay time. We actually want a different effect than that. We want this to, when it hears signal, we want it to turn down the decay time. That way it gets the reverb out of your way while you're playing, or at least tones it down a little bit. So to do that, we actually need to add another type of control module called an inverter. So the first thing we need to do is break this connection between the envelope follower and the reverb decay time. So we can do that just by touching these two modules, and see there it's displaying the connection. So we'll hit Shift and delete. So now we deleted that connection between these two squares. Then we're going to place a new module. We're going to go to Control Modules. And we are going to scroll until we find CV Invert. Perfect. Hit done. And then we're going to connect our envelope follower to the input of the CV Invert module. And press 1, connect it right there. And then we are going to connect this CV Invert to our reverb decay time. Okay, and let's see what that does. So we'll press over here on the decay time, and let's see what happens when we add some signal. So you can see there, while it's playing, it's turning that decay time really low. It's turning it down to maybe just about a second or so. So that's maybe a little bit too extreme to be turning that down. So what we'll do is select this invert module, the one that's connected to the decay time. We'll just tap those two. Let's just lower this down a bit. Maybe lower it to just about 40% or so. Okay, then we're going to hit back. And we'll look at the decay time again, play a little bit of signal, and see how it reacts. And then let's set the decay time, the base decay time rate down a little bit. Then we'll go and adjust this connection strength again, the CV invert to the decay. It's going to affect how much the envelope follower signal is going to be affecting the decay time. So we're going to turn that up a little bit more, maybe to around 60%. And all of these adjustments can just be to taste. So just experiment and see what sounds good to you. We'll hit back, select our decay time just to see what it's doing. One additional adjustment we might make is messing around with this rise and fall time. So that changes how quickly this CV envelope module is going to react to changes. So if we look at the CV output, so this is kind of shows you how it's modulating things. We'll play a little bit of signal, and you can see how that line is moving in reaction to the volume. So if we want it to kind of be getting into that reverb state quicker, so that state where the reverb is open wide because the signal is quiet, we can lower this time a little bit. Let's try 20. Let's see, come on, there we go. Then we'll touch this module right here to look at the output. That way it retains some of that reverb trail really quickly because it's shifting to a wide open decay. We can look at it again from here. Let's play a different signal. Let's open that up just a little bit more. And let's go here and weaken this connection a little bit. So that's how much the signal from the CV invert is adjusting the decay time. That way we just keep the whole signal a little bit with a little bit more decay. Hit back. Working with the ZOIA involves a lot of these small adjustments and getting everything just to taste. Yeah, it's a fun adventure and helps you develop a sound that's really unique to you. So yeah, let's try this out. All right, that sounds pretty good. So now I'd like to showcase one of the presets that I made for the ZOIA. It's called Slot Machine. And yeah, it works by using two different fuzz modules. So see the audio input here goes to two fuzz modules. And then the fuzz modules go into an audio balance module. So what that module does is it allows you to put in two different signals and then have a mix of the two. So I have that around 50%. So it's mixing the two different fuzz effects. And then from there, it's going into a tone control. So that's sort of like the knobs that you'd find on your amp. So it's just a little bit of tone shaping. And then from there, this is where it really starts getting crazy. It takes in audio and aliases it, which is usually associated with degradation in quality. It's kind of sort of like adjusting it to be lower bandwidth, but it ends up sounding really sick. And then from there, it's going into a gate, just so it doesn't make noise all the time. And then from there, the gate is to both of the outputs. So yeah, let's give it a listen. All right, so now let's examine another one of the ZOIA presets that I made. It's called National Geographic, and you'll see why in a minute. But essentially how it works is here we have our audio input up here. And on this one, I put the audio output on the upper right-hand corner just because I was running out of space. Yeah, so there are two kind of signal chains going on here. The first one is just straight into this VCA, like we did with the Verb preset, except this time, instead of going straight to the output, it's going into this reverb module that's at the very end of the other chain. So this reverb just goes straight to the outputs. And this is the ghost reverb effect. It's one of my favorite reverbs. The Hall and the Ghost are my two favorites, but they all sound really good. So yeah, so that's one signal path. And then the other signal path is going into this VCA that's being modulated by an LFO. So that means that over time, more and less signal is getting passed through here because, as we mentioned before, the VCA is just like a volume knob. So yeah, so then the VCA is going into this delay. It's a pretty relatively short delay, about a third of a second. And then from there, this delay is going into a phaser. And then, let's see, these are all the different parameters for the phaser. And then this phaser is going right into the reverb. So what we have is a direct kind of reverb, and this is already kind of a modulated reverb. Then we have varying amounts of signal going into a phaser and delay. So it creates this kind of like all these different kind of mushed together, kind of faded out sounding effects that all kind of create a singular soundscape. So what this creates is a sort of field. So what this creates is kind of a large cloud of sound that's at different. What this creates is. So what this creates is a larger cloud of sound that's at different phases and different delay times. And so let's hear it. All right, let's look at another preset. This one is called Alpine Canyon, and it works similarly to the Verb preset we made, except it uses a tremolo instead of a vibrato, which means that it modulates volume instead of modulating pitch. It's got an audio input, and then this audio input is going into a VCA. The VCA is going into an envelope follower. That envelope follower is going into an invert, which switches the direction that this envelope follower is modulating the tremolo rate, turning the rate down instead of turning it up. So that's the purpose of the CV invert. And then the tremolo is taking audio straight from the inputs, and it's sending directly to our plate reverb. And the plate reverb is going to the outputs. All right, let's take a listen. There is so much you can do with this pedal, and we're excited to see what you come up with. Check out the ZOIA forums on the Empress Effects website, and also check out the manual if you're hungry for more information about additional pages or information about every single module that's in the ZOIA pedal. There's a lot to soak in, but that's what makes it so fun to work with. This is Evan Serchuk signing off for Empress Effects.